They called him worthless, a dropout, a nobody with a mutt that should have been put down years ago. As thunder rolled over the city, he stood in front of a towering glass boardroom, soaked from the rain, his hoodie clinging to his frame, his dog limping beside him. The laughter inside was cruel, sharp, the kind that cuts deep when you have already bled too much. They looked at the dog first, old, scarred, one cloudy eye, a crooked paw. Then they looked at him, tired, broke, silent, like he had no right to be in the same building, let alone on the same floor. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Is this supposed to be a joke?" He scoffed. "You brought a dog to a shareholder meeting." The others laughed louder, their voices bouncing off the marble and glass. But the boy did not speak. He never did. He just looked at the chair at the end of the table, and the dog, as if sensing everything, limped forward and climbed onto it. They stopped laughing. The dog dropped something onto the polished wood. A small silver coin, nothing special, until one of them picked it up, scanned it, and froze. His fingers trembled, his lips parted, but no words came. The screen behind him lit up. The numbers matched. The coin was real. Not just real, legendary. The room fell silent. He finally spoke, voice soft but sharp as glass. "You all laughed when I gave my dog crypto coins to play with," he said, eyes locked on the stunned men before him. "But you never stopped to ask why. I gave them to him." The dog's tag shimmered in the light. Not just a tag, a wallet, a vault, a key, and the truth was the dog never played with the coins. He protected them, and now he was here to collect. He was not always like this, quiet, unshaven, ghosting through the world with a dog trailing behind him. There was a time, not long ago, when Ezra Langston was just a boy with a dream and a laptop held together with tape and faith. He grew up in a rusting trailer outside Houston, where money meant 2 meals a day and joy came in rare silence between his parents' arguments. His father left when Ezra was 9. His mother stayed but disappeared in her own way, swallowed by prescription bottles and the television's flickering blue light. Ezra found his escape in code. Numbers made sense when people did not. He could sit for hours, fingers dancing across keys, building quiet little worlds where he was in control. When he was 15, he started mining Bitcoin on an old gaming rig he pieced together from the scrapyard. No one paid attention, not at school, not at home, except one, the dog. The stray showed up during a thunderstorm. Wet, shaking, half-starved, with a wire twisted around his leg. Ezra took him in without hesitation. Named him Bishop after the chess piece that moved diagonally. Quiet, underestimated, but lethal if played right. They became inseparable. While Ezra coded, Bishop sat by the door, one cloudy eye always watching. No barking, no begging, just presence. Everyone said the boy was wasting his time. Crypto was a joke. The dog was a burden. Ezra should have been flipping burgers, not dreaming in blockchain. Teachers mocked his delusions. A guidance counselor once asked, "Why do you always look like you're waiting for someone to rescue you?" He was not. He was building something that could not be taken, freedom. But people like Ezra do not get invited to succeed. So when his mining wallet glitched one day and locked him out, everything collapsed. He smashed the laptop, threw his journals in the trash, gave the last remaining coins, physical crypto tokens from a novelty store, to Bishop. He did not know why, maybe because he needed someone to hold on to the dream, even if he could not anymore. Years passed. The world forgot about Ezra Langston, but Bishop never forgot. And somewhere in that small, rusted trailer, surrounded by silence and sacrifice, a quiet revolution was waiting. On 4 legs, the town of Marlow Ridge looked picture, perfect from a distance, neatly trimmed lawns, polished storefronts, and people who smiled only when watched. But underneath the surface, it was a place built on unspoken rules. If you were not born into money, you were expected to serve those who were. Ezra knew that rule too well. Even as a child, he felt the stares tight, lipped pity from the rich, passive dismissal from teachers, and cold rejection from any job that required a tie. Marlow High was no different. Students were divided not by talent, but by last name. If your father owned land, you walked the halls like a king. If your mother cleaned those halls, you kept your head down. Ezra belonged to the second group, and he never forgot it. Even now, as an adult in his mid-20s, nothing has changed. The tech start ups in town were all funded by the same 5 families. Banks denied him loans without explanation. The landlord glanced at his dog and simply said, "Not here." He walked Bishop along the same sidewalks every day, feeling invisible. Sometimes people whispered as they passed. Sometimes they said it to his face. "There goes the crypto crackpot and his mutt." Ezra never responded. Bishop did not even flinch. The only place that felt even remotely safe was the old co-op cafe by the train tracks. The owner, an old woman named Margot, served him lukewarm coffee and called him genius when no one else would. She never charged him full price. She also never asked questions. She saw Bishop first, always. "That dog of yours," she once said, "he watches people the way most men read newspapers." Ezra smiled faintly. "That's because he remembers everything." He meant it. Bishop could sense fear, sense lies, sense when something was about to happen, and lately, he had been tense, eyes sharper, movements are more alert. Ezra noticed but said nothing. In a town like Marlow Ridge, trust was currency, and Ezra had none to spend. Each day bled into the next: long walks, side hustles, shut doors, quiet dinners. But something was shifting. Bishop could feel it. The way his paws tapped faster near the bank, the way his ears flicked toward conversations. This town wanted Ezra to vanish, but the bishop was listening, and someone was about to be heard. It happened on a Thursday. One of those brittle wind-cut days when the cold sneaks into your bones and makes silence feel heavier than noise. Ezra had just stepped out of the Kopi cafe with Bishop trotting behind when a black SUV swerved too close at the curb. The tires sprayed slush across Ezra's jeans. Laughter echoed from inside. The SUV screeched to a stop a few feet ahead. The door opened. Out stepped Jace Harrow, the son of the town's wealthiest developer, always dressed like he was auditioning to be hated. Perfect smile, polished boots, and a temper hidden behind charm. He had known Ezra since high school, back when he used to call him Ezra Langston in front of the class. Some things did not change. Well, Jace grinned, sauntering closer. "If it isn't the crypto clown and his diseased sidekick." He tossed a dollar bill onto the ground. "Go fetch, mutt." Bishop did not move. His eyes locked on Jace's face, calm but unblinking. Ezra bent down to pick up the crumpled bill, not out of shame, but out of fury he had learned to hide. Jace leaned in. "Still chasing that fantasy of yours? Or did the dog finally talk you out of it?" Ezra straightened, eyes level with Jace's, but he said nothing. "You know what your problem is." Jace sneered. "You think silence makes you mysterious, but really, it just makes you forgettable." He turned to leave, but not before spitting on the sidewalk between them. Bishop let out a low guttural sound, not a bark, a warning. Jace paused, glancing back. "Control your animal before someone else has to." Ezra's hands clenched, but he gently touched Bishop's back. "He is not the one who needs controlling." The people at the cafe window watched but said nothing. No one ever did when Jace Harrow was involved. Power had a way of muting the crowd. Ezra walked away, slow, steady. Bishop followed, tail low, steps careful, but something inside Ezra had shifted. The kind of humiliation that crawls beneath your skin and festers. The kind that does not fade with time. The kind that writes itself into your spine until you cannot stand straight anymore without remembering it. He did not cry, not in front of the bishop. But that night, the silence between them was different, and Bishop sat facing the door, like he was expecting something. Or someone. The rain came harder that night, tapping against the trailer's thin roof like a memory trying to break through. Ezra sat at his old desk, staring at nothing. A shattered USB drive lay in a ceramic bowl on the shelf, once his backup wallet, now just a symbol of everything he had lost. The glow of his only lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and the room felt smaller than ever, cramped with what if regrets and questions that had never found answers. Bishop lay by the door, eyes open, body tense. He had barely touched his food. He was not whining, but Ezra knew something was wrong. The way the dog kept glancing toward the window, ears flicking at sounds only he could hear, it stirred something ancient in Ezra's chest, a kind of fear he had forgotten how to feel. Ezra leaned back, letting the chair creak. "You still believe in me?" he whispered, voice raw. Bishop lifted his head and for a long, steady moment stared directly into Ezra's eyes. Ezra sighed. "Because I don't even believe in myself," the silence answered back. His mind wandered back to the night. He gave Bishop those silver crypto tokens, back when they were just novelty coins he carried as a joke. After the real wallet locked him out, he remembered placing them in the Bishop's bowl and saying, "Guess these are yours now, buddy." He had laughed when he said it, a bitter kind of laugh, the kind that hides despair behind irony. But Bishop had not treated them like toys. He buried them in the floorboards near his bed, guarded them, like he understood. Ezra stood suddenly, pulled open the old trapdoor under the carpet where Bishop sometimes hid during storms. There, nestled in dust and scraps of chewed up fabric, were the coins, still there, untouched, clean. He stared at them, heart thudding. He had forgotten, but the Bishop had not. Something stirred in Ezra's chest. Not hope, not yet. Something smaller, a tremor of clarity. All this time, he thought the dog was following him, but maybe he had been following the dog. Ezra knelt beside Bishop, resting his forehead against the dog's. The contact felt grounding, like shaking hands with a part of himself he thought had died. "We're not done," he whispered, and Bishop's tail thumped once. Not loud, just enough. It began with a day. Flicker, a moment so small it almost passed unnoticed. Ezra was walking Bishop past the old courthouse, same as always. He'd never paid attention to the town's pulse anymore. It had long since beat without him. But today, the Bishop suddenly stopped. His ears perked. His gaze locked on a parking meter flashing red. Then, as if pulled by something deeper, he trotted over and nosed at the grate beside it. Ezra followed, crouching down to see what had caught the dog. As attention. A phone, not just any phone, a sleek, encrypted device. Still powered, still warm. Ezra's heart skipped. He looked around. No one. He picked it up, thumbing through the locked screen. And then it vibrated. A notification blinked into view. Transfer received. 1.2 BTC wallet. Bishop. Vault. Chain. His breath caught. He stared at the address. That was not a coincidence. That was Bishop's tag, the one he coded into the old tokens years ago as a joke, only he had forgotten it existed. But someone had not. Ezra rushed home, adrenaline pounding in his ears. He plugged the phone into his dusty laptop, bypassed the encryption using old command line scripts he thought he had buried along with his ambition. The balance was real, the transactions are recent, and they were all inbound, anonymous senders, masked addresses, every single one directed to the Bishop's vault. He sat back, stunned, his hand shook. "Why?" he whispered. Then he looked at Bishop. The dog sat by the door, calm, unmoving, and in that moment, something clicked. The Bishop had guarded the tokens the way he had buried them, the way he had lingered at the bank last week, his nose twitching near the mailbox outside. Bishop had been tracking something. Ezra realized this was not a random accident. Someone out there was using Bishop's wallet, sending test transfers. Small, quiet, purposeful. Someone knew what Bishop carried. Ezra checked the coins again. One had a microchip embedded, barely visible, disguised as a scratch in the metal. He had never put that there. Bishop had protecting more than tokens. He had been protecting data. Ezra looked at his old laptop like it had just whispered a secret. He glanced back at Bishop. "What are you trying to show me?" And the Bishop nudged the door open. It was time to follow. The wind whipped harder that afternoon, rattling dead leaves against the windows as if the town itself was growing restless. Ezra barely noticed. He had spent the entire night decoding files hidden deep within the blockchain linked to Bishop's, tagged fragments of code, strings of metadata, and something stranger, blueprints. Real ones. Architectural layouts, digital footprints, employee ID hashes. It pointed to a network far larger than Ezra could grasp in one sitting, and someone had been using Bishop's wallet address to leak it all, quietly, slowly, over years. Ezra was still connecting the dots when his phone lit up with a text. "From unknown number, you do not know what you have, but they do. Get rid of the dog." His breath stopped. The message was not a threat, it was a warning dressed as a command, and someone out there was watching. He looked down at Bishop, who sat calmly beside the door, tail still, muscles coiled beneath the surface. Alert, aware. Ezra's blood ran cold. He turned off the phone, smashed the SIM, but the world outside was already shifting. Later that day, as they walked near the center of town, Jace Harrow appeared again, this time in front of an audience. He leaned against a street lamp outside the bank, arms folded, smirking like a man rehearsing cruelty. His friends circled behind him, all suits and shiny teeth. Well, if it isn't the wandering hacker and his flea market of a dog. Ezra kept walking, but Jace stepped into his path, still pretending your mutt's worth something. Or did you finally figure out crypto was a scam? Like your life? Ezra opened his mouth to speak, but Jace shoved him. That was the mistake. Bishop surged forward, not barking, not growling, just moving, with surgical precision. He twisted sideways, pushed Ezra back with his shoulder, and locked eyes with Jace. Something primal passed between them. Jace laughed uneasily, stepping backward. "You trained him to attack me." "No," Ezra said, voice flat. "He trains himself." The bystanders had their phones out now. No one moved. Bishop stayed still, but the power in his silence said enough. Jace's smirk cracked. Then one of his friends reached into his coat. For a moment, time froze. Bishop shifted, sharp, deliberate. A signal. Ezra snapped. "Back off." The man paused, surprised. Bishop did not move an inch, but the tension in the air was electric. You could feel the warning hang there like something sacred had just been touched. Ezra stepped between them, not to protect the bishop, but because the bishop had already protected him. Jace scoffed, trying to laugh it off, but the shakiness in his voice betrayed him. "Watch your back, Langston. This town does not like secrets." Ezra said nothing, but Bishop's eyes never left the man's face, and for the first time, Jace looked afraid. That night, thunder rolled low like a giant shifting in its sleep. Ezra stood at the window of his trailer, staring out at the darkness beyond the trees. His laptop screen glowed behind him, open to a map one bishop had unknowingly created. Every location the dog had paused at, every scent he had followed. Ezra had begun tracking it weeks ago, thinking it was coincidence. It was not. They formed a circle around a building listed on no public record, just coordinates, and a name and code embedded deep in one of the transferred files, Project Marrow. Ezra whispered the name aloud. Bishop's ears perked. They left before dawn. The location was miles out, an abandoned animal research facility hidden behind barbed wire and forgotten grants. Ezra cut through a gap in the fencing, boots crunching over wet gravel. Bishop moved like he had been there before. Not tentative, not confused, certain. Inside, the walls were stripped, rooms gutted except one. A steel door, rusted but locked. Ezra ran his fingers over the keypad. Bishop pressed his nose against the side. A quiet beep, the door clicked open. Inside was not just dust and decay. There were files, servers, a nameplate on the ground that read Ezra Langston, his mother. Ezra froze. He never knew where she had disappeared to after the indictment. "Just that the media crucified her," said Sheed. "Stolen research and vanished. Now her past stared him in the face." The bishop stood beside him, completely still. Ezra picked up a file. Inside were records, experiments involving neural imprinting, data storage within animal memory, early tech that made blockchain look like stone tools, and scribbled notes in the margin. Test successful. Subject shows pattern recognition beyond predicted scope. Target, Bishop. Transfer active. Ezra's knees gave out. He sat hard on the floor. Bishop had not just been trained. He had been implanted. His mother had entrusted him her life's work, not to a vault, not to a machine, but to a dog, to him. Ezra whispered, You're the key." Bishop stepped forward, gently placing one paw on Ezra's lap, a confirmation, a bond, and in that moment, Ezra was no longer just a boy with a broken plan. He was the heir to a buried truth, and Bishop was more than a companion. He was the vault and the weapon. By the time Ezra made it back to town, the storm had passed, but the tension in the air had not. Marlow Ridge seemed to breathe differently now, like something was about to break. The sidewalks felt heavier beneath his feet, as if the very ground was whispering to him, and the people, They looked at him with a new kind of wariness. Their eyes darted away too quickly, voices dropping to whispers as he walked by. He knew the rumors were already spreading, and they were coming for him. Ezra didn't have time to care, not when he knew what was buried underneath the town. Not when he had the answer and the weapon to bring it to the surface. But Bishop had other plans. As Ezra walked past the bank, Bishop stopped, nose lifted, ears pinned. Ezra followed the dog's gaze to the large windows of the bank, where Jace Harrow stood speaking to a group of well-dressed men in sharp suits. They were laughing, talking business, but Ezra didn't need to hear the words. He saw the way Jace's smile faltered when his eyes met Ezra's. Jace's hand shook slightly as he reached for a glass of water, his gaze flicking nervously to the dog. Ezra's mind clicked into place. Jace had known. All this time, he had known about Bishop, about the data, about the experiments. It wasn't just about humiliating Ezra. It had never been. It was about controlling him. He had to act. Ezra took a deep breath, and then, without thinking, he moved. He crossed the street without waiting, not glancing back. Bishop followed at his heel, eyes trained forward. When he stepped into the bank, the soft chime of the door seemed like a signal cutting through the silence. Heads turned, the laughter died. Jace looked up, his eyes flashing with a mixture of recognition and fear. "Langston," he sneered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Did you lose your way to the alley?" Ezra's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person in the lobby. The patrons, the employees, the one or two curious faces still lingered near the windows. "This bank," Ezra said, his voice steady and firm, echoing across the room, "has been redirecting confidential data. Every account in this town has been affected. You used me to cover it up." Jace stiffened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What are you even saying?" A low growl cut through his words. Bishop, calm but alert, let the sound linger, and the room fell silent under its weight. Ezra held Jace's gaze. "I traced the data streams. Every single transfer ends in your name. You thought no one would catch it." He flipped open his laptop and connected it to the nearby terminal. His fingers moved fast, opening the archived records sent to him from the secure system. As the lines of code and transaction logs appeared on screen, the truth was undeniable. "You've been rerouting everything, locking out access, rewriting logs." But Bishop, Ezra glanced at the dog, still staring down Jace without blinking, "has followed every move you made." The bank manager stepped forward, a nervous energy behind his confusion. "I do not know what this is about," he said cautiously. "You need to leave, or I will have to report this." Jace raised a hand, but even he could not hide the slight tremble. "You are reading this all wrong. There are things here you do not understand." "I understand enough," Ezra replied, voice cool and clear. "You built a system that hides behind walls, and you used people like me to keep it running. That ends today." Jace's face shifted, part anger, part fear. He looked at the screen again, eyes searching for a way out. "And you really think someone will believe your version of this?" Ezra did not blink. "Want proof?" He nodded toward Bishop. Without hesitation, the dog stepped forward, padded to the back wall, and raised his paw to the security panel. A soft beep echoed. The vault door unlocked and slowly opened. Inside were folders, internal records, sealed reports, documents that had been hidden under layers of restricted access and internal silence. The entire room felt quiet. Jace's expression drained. He stood completely still. The mask he had worn for so long slipped, and what remained was the truth, bare and undeniable. Ezra took a step forward, turning his attention to the manager. "This is your moment. You are either part of this, or you help make it right. What you choose next will define everything." The manager looked pale, blinking as he tried to gather his thoughts. "We will review this immediately, but you have to understand no," Ezra said calmly, interrupting. "This does not get buried, not this time." He closed the laptop and stepped back, Bishop silently moving beside him, loyal and composed. This was not about a job anymore, not about reputation. This was about truth. Jace stood frozen, no more words to offer. Everything he had built, everything he had shielded, had been unraveled in minutes. Outside, sirens echoed faintly, growing louder. Ezra's eyes narrowed. Not with anger, but with resolve. The silence in the room was not just the end of a lie, it was the beginning of something better. The sirens wailed louder, cutting through the silence of the once quiet town like the final chapter of a story that no one wanted to finish. Ezra stood outside the bank, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the glass doors that now stood open wide, the chaos spilling out into the street. Police officers moved quickly, cuffing Jace Harrow, while other officers combed through the vault, gathering evidence. It was all happening too fast, and yet it felt like everything had been building to this one moment. Bishop sat beside Zera, calm, almost eerily still, as if the dog had known this would come. His dark eyes flickered from Ezra to the scene unfolding before them, and Ezra could almost hear his thoughts. It's over now, it's finished. But Ezra wasn't sure he believed that. Jace Harrow was dragged out of the bank, his face a mask of disbelief, as if the world he'd built had somehow betrayed him. The officers didn't even bother to ask him questions. The evidence was irrefutable, but Jace's eyes were locked on Ezra as he was shoved into the back of the squad car, and Ezra could see the last remnants of arrogance fading. Now, there was only fear. Ezra knew what it felt like to have everything fall apart, to have the ground shift beneath you when you least expected it. But this was different. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding behind the shadows of his mistakes. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had earned the right to stand tall. As the officers began to move the documents from the vault into evidence trucks, Ezra's mind drifted to the people who had once ignored him, those who had looked past him and thought him invisible, the ones who had dismissed his intelligence, his worth. He had been nothing to them, a boy with a broken past and a mutt for a companion. But that was before, and now. They would see him, they would know him. The same way they knew Bishop. A heavy hand fell on Ezra's shoulder, and he turned to find the familiar face of Officer Riley, a man who had watched the chaos from the sidelines, but had always been more sympathetic than others. "You did good, kid," Riley said, his voice low, but filled with the kind of respect Ezra had never thought he would earn. "I never thought I'd see the day when the whole damn town would turn on him." Ezra looked down at Bishop, who was wagging his tail lightly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "It wasn't just me," Ezra replied quietly. "It was him too. He's always been the one holding the pieces together." Riley nodded, his eyes flicking to the dog. "Yeah, I'm starting to believe that." A group of reporters had gathered at the edge of the scene, their cameras trained on Ezra. They didn't know who he was, not yet. They'd never seen the quiet boy who sat in the back of the class, whose name barely escaped their lips. They saw a hero now. They saw someone who had finally fought back. As the reporters began to shout questions, Ezra held up, his hand silencing them for just a moment. His eyes met the camera, his voice steady and clear. "You want to know what happened here? What has this town been hiding?" "It's simple," he said, feeling the weight of every word, the responsibility in them. "I wasn't the one keeping secrets. I was just the one who had to dig them up." There was a quiet pause. The reporters scribbled furiously, trying to make sense of what he had just said, but Ezra didn't care about the headlines. He didn't care about fame. Not anymore. It was over. But not for Jace Harrow. Not for the ones who had tried to profit off of pain and deception. In the days that followed, Ezra stood at the front of town meetings as the mayor and council scrambled to deal with the mess Jace had left behind. The media coverage exploded, bringing in even more questions, more investigations into the corruption that had run through the town's veins for decades. And each time Zera spoke, it was with a new kind of power, a quiet, unwavering strength that no one could ignore. Bishop had been more than a companion, more than just a dog. He had been the key to unlocking the truth, to exposing the lies, and in return, Ezra promised to give him more than just a good home. He would protect him, just as the bishop had protected him. One morning, a few weeks after the chaos had died down, Ezra sat in his small apartment, fingers hovering over his keyboard, but not typing. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere bigger. He had made a decision. He wasn't going to stop here. The world had opened up to him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and he knew he couldn't go back to his quiet, forgotten life. With Bishop by his side, he started the foundations of a new project, a non-profit, one that worked to expose corruption, to help those who had been silenced, to give power back to those who had been ignored. It wasn't just about the money or the fame. It was about real change. It was about using what he had learned to do something good. Bishop walked over to the desk and nuzzled his head against Ezra's knee, as if sensing the new beginning. Ezra smiled and scratched behind his ear. "You're not just a good boy, Bishop," he murmured. "You're a hero." And in that moment, as the sun rose over the horizon, they both knew the fight for justice had only just begun, but they were ready together. The town of Marlow Ridge had changed in ways Ezra never thought possible. The whispers of corruption, the shadows of greed, and the suffocating silence that had once plagued the streets were now exposed. Justice wasn't a distant hope anymore, it was a present truth, and the town had learned to breathe in the light of it. Ezra and Bishop walked through the main street every morning, the air now filled with a sense of possibility. It was a different town, one where people no longer kept their heads down, where they looked at one another with respect. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't flawless, but it was real, and it was theirs. Ezra had started speaking at local events, sharing his story with anyone who would listen. His voice had grown stronger with each passing day, no longer the timid murmur of the boy who had once been invisible. The mayor had even approached him with an offer to help clean up the town's affairs officially. It was an unexpected honor, but one Ezra was hesitant to accept. He didn't want to get tangled up in politics. He wanted to be the kind of person who made real change without the barriers of bureaucracy holding him back. Bishop, of course, had become something of a local legend. The dog who had saved the town, who had helped unearth a truth no one was brave enough to look for. People came to Ezra not just to shake his hand, but to pet Bishop, to thank him for the role he had played. The town had started a fund to ensure Bishop's well-being and even put up a small memorial plaque near the park in his honor. Yet, despite all of the changes, Ezra never let the fame or the attention get to his head. His focus remained on the purpose, the fight for transparency, for truth, for healing. He was determined to rebuild the trust that had been broken for so long. But things had also changed within him too. The boy who had once hidden behind his insecurities, who had let his past define him, was gone. Ezra was not the same person who had wandered the streets with nothing but a dog at his side. He had learned to fight, not with fists or force, but with the truth, with the quiet, undeniable power of knowing what was right. And, more than anything, he had learned the value of his own worth. As the months passed, Ezra and Bishop became symbols, not of perfection, but of transformation, of redemption. One afternoon, Ezra found himself sitting on the same bench where he had first realized the depth of the conspiracy, the place where it had all clicked, where the weight of it all had finally fallen into place. Bishop lay next to him, his head resting on Ezra's lap, his breathing soft and rhythmic. The town around them bustled, but there was peace here. A gentle breeze blew through the trees, carrying with it the scent of fresh pine. Ezra closed his eyes for a moment, letting the calm settle over him. He thought of his mother, how she had sacrificed everything for what she believed in. He thought of the people who had doubted him, who had used him for their own gain. And he thought of Bishop, who had never wavered, who had stood by him when everyone else had walked away. "We did it, didn't we?" Ezra whispered to the dog, his fingers running through Bishop's fur. "We really did it." Bishop's tail wagged once, the only response he ever needed to give. He didn't need words. He never had. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was the kind of moment that felt timeless, one that Ezra would carry with him for the rest of his life. The world had once seemed so heavy, so overwhelming, but now it felt different. He had a purpose. And with Bishop by his side, there was nothing he couldn't face. In the distance, he saw a group of children walking by, eyes wide as they stared at the statue of Bishop that had been placed in the park. They asked questions, pointing at the plaque, and an older woman stopped to explain the story of how the dog had helped change the town. Ezra smiled, proud in a way he never thought possible. This was what they had fought for. Not for recognition, not for glory, but for this. To leave something behind that mattered, to leave a mark on the world that would outlive them. The future was no longer just a shadow, it was a bright, open path. And at the end of it, Ezra and Bishop would walk side by side, together, forever. Ezra stood up, Bishop following suit. They had work to do. There were more stories to tell, more truths to uncover. But for now, as the sun set behind them, they simply enjoyed the peace they had fought so hard to earn. "Let's go home, boy," Ezra murmured as they walked side by side, disappearing into the fading light, and in that moment, everything was right. 1 year later, Marlow Ridge was a town reborn. The heavy veil of fear and corruption that had once clouded every corner had lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. It was as if the entire community had been given a second chance, and everyone, whether they realized it or not, was a part of that transformation. The streets, once filled with hushed conversations and side glances, were now lively with voices of people who had found their courage, their truth. Ezra stood on the balcony of his small office, looking out over the town he had helped reshape. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the buildings and streets. The breeze, sweet with the scent of pine, ruffled the papers on his desk and tugged at his jacket. A year ago, this view had seemed so far out of reach, a distant dream that belonged to someone else. But now it was his reality. His heart swelled with pride and gratitude, and as he turned his gaze down to the street below, he saw the familiar figure of Bishop trotting by his side, tail wagging happily. The dog had become more than just a companion. He was a symbol of everything Ezra had fought for. The unwavering loyalty, the courage to stand up when it seemed impossible, the ability to make a difference against all odds. The town had embraced Bishop as their own, and as he watched the dog weave through the people on the street, stopping for pats and smiles, Ezra knew this was where they both belonged. The non-profit he had started to expose corruption and fight for justice was thriving. The community had rallied behind him, funding initiatives that brought transparency, support for the forgotten, and opportunities for those who had been overlooked. Ezra was no longer the boy they ignored. He was the man who had given them the truth, who had shown them that even in the darkest places, there was always light, and Bishop had been the catalyst, the reason the truth had come to light. It was still hard to believe, sometimes. He still had moments where he felt like an imposter, like he didn't belong in this world of leaders and activists. But then he'd look at Bishop, look at the way the dog moved through the crowd, the way people greeted them with respect and admiration, and he knew that all those doubts had no place here. As he stepped away from the balcony and walked through the office, he glanced at the framed photos on the wall. There was a picture of him and Bishop taken the day the non-profit had opened its doors. There was one of him speaking at a community event, his voice strong and steady, with the bishop sitting by his side, always watching. And then there was a photo from the day they had finally confronted Jace Harrow, the day everything had changed. Ezra hadn't been the one to defeat Jace. No, that had been a collective effort, a town-wide revolt against corruption. But it was Bishop who had brought the final piece of evidence, the thing that had tipped the scales. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, and Bishop had known exactly where to find it. Now, as Ezra looked at the photos, he realized something. He had always thought that the world owed him something, that he was entitled to a life free of the pain, the doubt, and the suffering. But the truth was, he had owed himself this life. He had earned it. He had fought for it, and Bishop had helped him see that. Even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. There was always hope. Ezra turned from the wall, walking to the door. He paused, just long enough to look back at the photos once more, at the life he had built from the ashes of his past. Then, with one last glance, he stepped out into the sunlight where Bishop was waiting for him. The world had shifted, but there was still so much more to do. They had made a difference in Marlow Ridge, but their work wasn't done. There were more towns, more people, more stories to uncover. Ezra had learned that one victory, no matter how big, was never enough. It was the fight that mattered. It was the journey, not the destination. And so, with Bishop at his side, Ezra stepped into the future. "Ready, boy?" Ezra asked softly, a smile playing on his lips. Bishop's ears perked up, and the dog gave a small, playful bark, as if to say, "Always together." They walked down the street, the town buzzing with life around them, their path just beginning. The world was wide and there were battles still to fight, but they had one another. And with that they knew they could face anything. As they disappeared into the horizon, the sun set behind them, casting a warm glow over the town that had once turned its back on them, but had now embraced them both. In the distance, a new chapter waited, and this time they would write it together.